from the end. Begin to see yourself surrounded by the people and the events and the things that you would like to have. Only see yourself. You're having a problem with an addiction, see yourself as addiction-free. See yourself, if there's a car that you want. My son was perfect at this, Sans. I mean, he's just so good at this. Because there's a certain car that he wanted. It's yellow. And he didn't just bug me about it every day, which they all do. And all kids will do that. But he saw himself. He got a picture of it. He put it on his computer. It's the background of his computer, this yellow whatever it is. All right? I call it the school bus. I told him I was going to put cab fares on the side of it, but that's what he wanted. Huh? And then he saw him, and then he went down and he drove it. And it was a used car, and he got on the internet, and he just saw himself in it. He couldn't not see himself in it. You know, we call this just persistence and being a pain in the rear end oftentimes, but it's not that at all. What it is young people have this instant knowing and awareness that I can create what I want for myself in my life, and the way that I do it is I act as if it's already here. And almost like they won't be denied it. That's what intention is. It's not that pit bull attitude. It's that awareness that I am thinking from the end. It's already here, because everything that you think is missing from your life is already here. The third of these dozen is to be an appreciator in your life. Be an appreciator. Look for that which is valuable rather than worthless. Look, you go out and you buy a house, and 10 years later we say it appreciates in value. What does that mean? What does it mean that a house appreciates? It is more what? Valuable. It's more same thing with you. If you're an appreciator, you have more value. Now you buy a car, you drive it off of the lot, and they say, well, it just depreciated by 20%. What does that mean? It is not as valuable as it was before. When you depreciate, you take your value away. When you appreciate, you make yourself valuable. What could be more valuable than being connected to Source? 4, stay in rapport with Source energy. Stay in rapport. Your job here is to be in a state of harmony with this. Constantly reminding yourself, is this how my Source thinks? 5, resistance. Understand this about resistance. Every thought that you have that is other than that which you emanated from is resistance. Every unkind thought, every uncreative thought, every thought of judgment, every thought of fear, every thought of depression, every thought of it can't happen, all resistance. So if you say, well, easy for him, he can talk about this, but I can't, that's resistance. You're right, absolutely. Even if you think all of this is a bunch of nonsense, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely, because for you, that's what you believe. And if you believe that, the universal Source will help you to fulfill that belief. 6th is what I talked about many times in the program. Contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you want to produce. Contemplate yourself that, because the way you are one with Source. You are always one with Source. You are one with all of its principles, all of those phases. You are one with it. It can't be anything other than it is. Neither can you. 7, understand the art of allowing. Allowing means taking the path of least resistance. Every time you have a thought that has resistance in it, what you have done is you have created an absence of allowing. You have to almost think like, here I am here, and here's Source. How much energy can I pull from it? How much energy can I pull from it? Are you pulling energy from Source, or are you away from it? Allowing. Allow yourself. 8, practice radical humility. You are not this body that you are in. You are not this mind that you are in. You are not any of the possessions that you have. You are a divine Source. 9, be in a constant state of gratitude. Be grateful for everything that shows up. Everything. Stay in a state of being generous and grateful in your life. Because what could be more generous than that which has allowed you to come from the infinite source to this material world and back? 10, keep in mind that you can never resolve a problem by condemning it. Any problem that you have, when you use shame, you are using the lowest energy that's out there in the universe. You cannot shame your way into higher consciousness, into source energy. 11, play the match game. Play the match game. Always ask yourself, am I matched up with the field of intention? And finally, meditate. Make it a practice in your life. Meditation is essential because it is your way of staying connected to source. What is the only thing in the universe that can't be divided? You cannot divide God. Everything else has an up, down, north, south, east, west, male, female, right, wrong, black, white, alive, dead. Everything comes in dichotomies except for silence. Silence, you cut it in half, what do you get? More silence. Cut it in half again, more silence. Cut source in half, just more source. You can't divide it. Meditation. Stay in the gap. I'd like to close out this program on the power of intention with a story that was sent to me by my dear friend, Ellen. It's called Attitude. A 92-year-old, petite, well-poised, and proud lady who's fully dressed each morning by 8 o'clock, 92 years old, with her hair fashionably coiffed and makeup perfectly applied, even though she's legally blind and moved to a nursing home today. Her husband of 70 years recently passed away, making the move necessary. After many hours of waiting patiently in the lobby of this nursing home, she smiled sweetly when she told her room was now ready. As she maneuvered her walker to the elevator, I provided a visual description of her tiny room, including the eyelit sheets that had been hung on the window. "I love it," she stated, with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old, having just been presented with a new puppy. "But Mrs. Jones, you haven't even seen the room yet. Just wait." "That doesn't have anything to do with it," she said. "Happiness is something you decide on ahead of time. Whether I like my room or not doesn't depend on how the furniture is arranged. It's how I arrange my mind." When you change the way you look at things, even if you're legally blind, the things you look at change. God bless you, and thank you.
Next, a special bonus segment. For the first time in 20 years, Dr. Dyer speaks about the profound and very personal event that transformed his own life.
One of the most important ideas that I've ever encountered came from something I read in Castaneda's very last book called The Active Side of Infinity. In The Power of Intention, I wrote an entire chapter on you and your role with infinity. What he said in here that made such a profound impact on me was that he said the problem with humanity, with what people in the Western world who are not living of the source, is that we are all in bodies that are going to die. But we act as if they're not. And I thought about that. I've contemplated that whole idea a long time. And he said, when you act as if you're in a body that is not going to die, you live on what he called the inactive side of infinity. And our objective here in connecting to intention is to move ourselves to the active side of infinity. The active side of infinity is the place where we recognize our infinite nature. And so we understand what Jesus meant when he spoke of you are in this world, but you're not of this world. And almost all of us believe that we are in this world and that we are of this world as well. And we can't get past that idea. So that to move and understand our infinite nature is one of the more complicated and difficult things to do. But once you get it, you get it. I remember when I was living out in Mount Clemens, Michigan, at the home of a beautiful lady who took in children who were in the same kinds of conditions that I was in and that my mom was in. I was born in 1940. My mother had 3 boys under the age of 4. I was the youngest. And my father, when I was about 1.5 or 2, just left. And my mother divorced him, but he never, he had 3 boys, and he never made a phone call, ever, in his entire life. Never made any attempt to contact or pay any support. And I used to always wonder about how could someone, and my mother was one of these really beautiful, divine souls. I mean, everybody, when I was, she got us back together when I was 9 years old, 1949. And all of my friends always wanted to come to our house because our house was the place where there was no judgment. It was fun. We always had a good time. There was always something to eat for everybody. And particularly, it was a happy, exciting, beautiful place. And I always wondered about how could a man leave a woman with 3 boys under the age of 4 when he was perfectly capable of staying and working. There was a war going on at that time and so on. And he spent quite a few years of his life in prison. And and I had this gnawing internal kind of desire to meet this man and to find him. And I used to dream about him. I was filled with anger about him and so on. And the turning point in my life came when I shifted my perceptions about my father. My father, all I knew was his name. His name was Melvin Lyle Dyer. I knew he was born in 1914. I used to go to sleep at night and dream about meeting him. I used to wake up filled with anger, sweating sometimes. I would have these dreams where I would fight with him in my sleep. And I'd wake up just soaking wet, filled with anger. And in all of those years, up until I was 34 years old, in 1974, I dreamt about him almost every single night. And I always would ask my mother to see if she could tell me something about him. Where was he? What? She never wanted to. She's just filled with rage towards this man. So I got a note in 1974 or 73 informing me that my father, this was from a cousin that I didn't know I had. Her name was Dorothy Phillips. And she told me that my father had died 10 years before, 1964, at the age of 49, of cirrhosis of the liver. And that he was buried in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that he died in New Orleans. And that's all the information that she had. Well, my 2 brothers never wanted to hear a word about my father, I think partly because they remembered him. They were a year and 2 years older than me, and they didn't want any part of it. I had this sort of very innate kind of powerful inquisitiveness about who was this person. And more than anything, I wanted to know how could he do it? And did he acknowledge that he had 3 sons? Actually, I just wanted to know if he acknowledged that he had a son named Wayne. And I was teaching at that time. I was a professor at St. John's University in New York. I was teaching counseling psychology. And that was the time of a lot of the things that Lyndon Johnson had put into effect called the Great Society, and they were integrating some of the southern schools and so on. And I was given a job with the federal government, a temporary job, to just a part-time thing to go along with my professorship. I was to fly down to a place in Mississippi called the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, Mississippi. And I thought to myself, I had just found out recently, I don't even know exactly how far back it had been, but I had found out that my father had died. And I looked on a map and I saw that Columbus was only 200 miles from Biloxi, and I knew that my father's body had been shipped as an indigent from New Orleans to Biloxi. So I got down to Columbus, and I sat in on classes, and I wrote up my report on the civil rights laws and whether they were being honored and so on. And then I rented a car, and it was a Friday afternoon. And the car that I rented was a 1974 Dodge Coronet. It was blue. And in those days, they only had the lap belts. They didn't have the shoulder belts, the shoulder harness. So this car, as weird as this all sounds, and my life at that time was really shaky. I was drinking. I wasn't in a good kind of relationship I wanted to be in. My writing wasn't, I just couldn't seem to put it all together. I was overweight. I had very little discipline. And I was very much ego involved in my life. And, but I always knew I had a different kind of a destiny, and I just couldn't seem to get, and this stuff with my father was always there, this internal kind of rage. And so I went, I got in this car, and the car was at an Avis rent-a-car place, and nobody had ever rented the car before. Nobody had ever driven the car before. It had 0 miles on the odometer, like 0.6 or something. It had been trucked in that day to be rented by me. So I rented this car. I got in, and I went to put on the seatbelt, and I put the left belt on, and then I reached under to get the right belt, and there was no right-hand belt. And I was a fanatic about wearing seat belts and so on. So I got out of the car, and I wanted to find this belt, and I took the seat out, and I put it on the ground, and there, taped to the floorboard of the car, was a plastic, wrapped in plastic was the buckle. And there was a rubber band around it, and the whole thing with masking tape was taped to the floorboard of the car, I guess to protect it from cutting the upholstery or whatever. So I took the stuff out, I took the rubber band off, I got the whole thing out, I put it up, put the seat in, reached in to put the buckle on, and inside of the buckle, there's a business card in this brand new car. And I looked at the card, and it said, Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi. And on the back, a map imprinted on how to get to this Candlelight Inn. And I just had one of those flashing kinds of strange moments and said, that's weird. But I didn't think any more about it. I just put it in, and I said, somebody at the factory, whatever it is, and I put it in my pocket. I said, but I'm going to Biloxi. So I drove to Biloxi. It was a Friday afternoon, and at the end of August, and I pulled into the outskirts of Biloxi. Welcome to Biloxi. And I pulled over, and there was a gas station there. I drove into the gas station. There was a telephone with a Yellow Pages, and I went and looked up cemeteries. It's the only clue I had. And there were 3 listings, 2 very large listings and 1 real small minor listing. So I called the 2. There was no answer at the first. Nobody answered at the cemetery. Second one I called was busy. So I called this tiny little number, and this man came on, and I said, and he had a southern drawl, and I said, I'm calling to find out if there's a Melvin Lyle Dyer who died in 1964. I believe that was the exact date. And would he be buried at your cemetery? And he said, well, this isn't really a cemetery, but they do bury people here. He said, I'll check. And he was gone for at least 10 minutes. And he came back, and he was rifling through Coca-Cola boxes that they had brought Coca-Cola. And this is how they filed things in Mississippi in those days. And he said, I found your father's record. He was buried here in 1964. I said, well, I'm on a journey as my father. I've been searching for my father for my whole life. I would just like to go to, where he's buried. He said, well, it's not really a funeral home. He said, your father is buried on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn. It's a true story. So I reached in my pocket and I said, I've got a map. And I drove to this little place. This was like the turning point in my life, and when I began to believe in the active side of infinity. And I went to this little marker on the ground. There wasn't even a gravestone there, just a little marker. And it said Melvin Lyle Dyer. I'm not exactly sure of these dates, but I'm pretty sure it's 1914, 1964. And I stood there, and when I went in, the man said, well, he said, you can leave. When you do, just put the chain up over the fence and over the driveway with it. And I said, okay. And I was there. It was about 5:15 or so. And I stayed there for almost 3 hours. It was dark now. It was 8 o'clock. And I just cursed at my father. And I just stomped on the ground. And I just said, how could you have done this? And what was in your mind? And how could you just leave? And why didn't you ever call? And what? It was like this tearful, very powerful turning point, peak experience in my life. And then something came over me. And I remember what Mark Twain said about forgiveness. He said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And something came over me that had never come over me before, and I said to my father, I forgive you. I don't know why. I said, from this moment on, for the rest of my life, I will send you love. I will only see you in a loving light. And I put the chain up, I drove out, and I went home. I flew back up to New York, took a very brief sabbatical of about 2 weeks, and I went down to a place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called the Spindrift